What's up everyone, welcome back to my fourth and last vlog from my recent trip to the 2022 World Series of Poker. In the previous episode, I made a deep run in a Wsop $200 Daily Deepstack, but that was only one of 3 tournaments I played on that day, so I'm going to cover the other 2 in this episode, as well as a quick cash game session I played at Bellagio. Let's go! For the first tournament of the day, I make my way to the Orleans to play in their 11 a.m. 30k guaranteed tournament. The buy-in is $200. Players get a starting stack of 20,000 chips, and levels last 30 minutes. As the name indicates, the prize pool is a guaranteed $30,000. I could definitely use a nice score at this point in my trip. Let's get right into it. We join the action at the 400 big blind level. I look down at Queen Jack offsuit in the low jack. Action folds to me and I open to 1,000. The big blind is the only player to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of 7-5-6 rainbow. The big blind checks to me. This is definitely not a board on which I'm going to c-bet versus the big blind, so I check back. The turn brings a jack, which gives me top pair, and the big blind checks to me for a second time. I bet 1,000 for value, and the big blind calls. The river is the king of diamonds, and once again, the big blind checks to me. I hesitate to bet again, but I don't think I'm getting value from much here, so I check back, and my pair of jacks is good enough to take down the pot. Here I pick up pocket jacks in middle position at the 600 big blind level. Action folds to me, and I debate what to do here. I have close to 18 big blinds in my stack, so I can make a standard 2.5, 3x raise. Those have been getting 2, 3, sometimes 4 callers at this table, which is not ideal. If I go for a bigger sizing and get called, I'll have a stack to pot ratio of around 1, so my 2 options at that point will be to either c-bet all in on a favorable flop, or check fold to a bet on the board with overcards. If I'm going to be committing my entire stack on the flop, I think I'd rather commit pre-flop and potentially get folds from hands containing overcards that could put me in a tough spot on the flop. With that in mind, I decide to open shove. Action folds around to the small blind who makes the call, so we're going heads up to a run out. My opponent shows ace-10 of diamonds, so I'm in pretty good shape. The flop comes jack, 8, king with 2 hearts. I flop a set, but my opponent flops a gut shot. The turn is a 10, which changes nothing, and the river is a 4. I hold, and I get a full double up back to just above starting stack. In this one, I get dealt jack 7 suited in the big blind. The cutoff opens to 1400. Action folds to me. I have a nice hand to defend with, so I make the call. The flop comes queen 9 jack with 2 hearts, a great flop for my hand. I check and float to the cutoff player who checks back. The turn brings the 4 of hearts, giving me the flush. When my opponent checks back on this flop, I think they're pretty weak, so I'm going to bet small here and try to get a light call from a single pair, a 10, or a big heart, so I bet 1,000, and the cutoff calls. The river comes the king of diamonds, which puts 4 to a straight on the board. Targeting a hero call from a 10 and trying to make my hand look like a bluff, I decide to overbet to 8,000, and after thinking for a little bit, the cutoff makes the call. I show my flush, and my opponent mugs his cards. I pick up a nice spot. Let's go. In this hand, I look down at pocket 8s from middle position at the 800 big blind level. Action folds to me, I open to 2,000, and the big blind is the only player to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of 4-7-7 rainbow. The big blind checks. I bet 2,000 for value and protection against overcards, and the big blind folds. Here, I pick up pocket 7s in the hijack at the 1,000 big blind level. Action folds to me and I open to 2,500. It folds around to the small blind who min clicks it back to 5,500. I'm not loving this spot versus this player who seems to have been playing pretty standard so far, but I don't think I can fold for an extra 3,000 here. I make the call. We go heads up to a flop of 9-4-10 rainbow. The small blind decides to not c-bet and checks. I don't think my hand is strong enough to go for value. I think this is better played as a bluff catcher, so I check back. The turn is the 7 of spades. Hello! What a great turn for me. If my opponent decided to check an overpair on the flop for deception, they're going to have a really hard time getting away from their hand. The small blind bets 6,000. I could smooth call here in case they're bluffing with the big ace and see what they do on the river. But as I said before, if they have an overpair, I don't think they're going anywhere if I shove. I want to get max value from my set, so I raise all in for just over 19,000, and the small blind calls just a little too fast for my liking. I show my set of 7s and they show pocket 10s. Fuck. The euphoria of turning a set quickly turns to despair as I am drawing dead to the last remaining 7. Thanks for the support, 7s guy. But the river is a queen, and I am out of this tournament.
But wait! There's more!
The beautiful thing about being in Vegas during the World Series of Poker is that there's always a tournament starting somewhere, and for my next one, I make my way to the home of the Wsop, Paris, to play the 5 p.m. $400 Daily Deepstack. Players get a starting stack of 30,000, and blinds go up every 20 minutes. Let's go! In this hand, we're at the 100 big blind level, and I look down at pocket 7s in the small blind. I decide to just complete here, and the big blind raises to 400. I make the call, and we go heads up to a flop of 9-3-6 rainbow. I check and flow to the big blind player, who down bets to 300. I could raise for value and to deny equity from overcards, but I decide to just call. The turn comes another 6. I check, and this time the big blind checks back. The river is a deuce. I'm confident I have the best hand, and although there's not many hands in my opponent's range I can get value from, I go ahead and bet 800 just in case they want to make a crying call with ace high. They make the call, I show my pocket 7s, and they're good. Here I pick up pocket kings in the small blind. There's a limp from the middle position player, action folds to me, I raise to 400, and the middle position player makes the call. Heads up to a flop of 5-3-10 rainbow. I decide to check for deception. The middle position player bets 700, and I make the call. The turn comes another 3, and because my opponent bet pretty large on the flop, I think they have some piece of this board, and they'll want to bet again if I check to them. I check, and this time they bet 1100. I'm obviously not going anywhere, I make the call. The river is a 6. Taking a moment to think about my opponent's likely holdings, I think they could have a set of 5s, to which I lose. With 2 3s on the board, it's unlikely that they have a 3. I think they would have opened with pocket 10s pre-flop, and I don't think they would have barreled twice with pocket 6s. So the most likely hand I lose to is pocket 5s. I do beat all of my opponent's 10s that they would limp call pre-flop. It's possible that they barrel twice with some middling pair like pocket 7s, 8s, or 9s. So overall, there's quite a few hands I can get value from that my opponent might check back now that I call twice. I decide to lead for 3,500, and my opponent almost beats me to the pot with a snap call. I show my kings, and they're good. We're now at the 200 big blind level. I get dealt ace-10 suited in the under the gun 1 position, and the under the gun player opens up the action to 500. I have a pretty solid image at the table so far, so I want to start putting some pressure on my opponent, and 3-bet to 2,000. Action falls back to under the gun, who makes the call. Heads up to a flop of 9-4 deuce rainbow, and they check to me. My read on my opponent so far is that they're playing pretty basic fit or fold poker, and they're not thinking about ranges or anything like that, so I want to keep applying pressure and get them to fold their better aces or deny equity from hands like king queen or king jack. I down bet to 1,200, and it gets the job done. My opponent folds. In this one, I look at ace-6 suited in the big blind. There's an open from the low jack to 700. The hijack calls, and I'm going to make the call with my suited ace. We go 3 ways to a flop of ace, jack, ace with 2 spades. I check and flow to the original raiser, but unfortunately, action checks around. Still 3 ways to the turn, which comes the 8 of clubs. With 2 flush draws on board, I think I could start extracting some value from my hand, so I bet 1,700. The initial raiser folds, and the hijack makes the call. The river is interesting. It's another 8, which now gives me a boat. If my opponent had a draw, they're not going to call a bet here. I want to give them a chance to bluff, so I check, and they oblige by betting 1,100. I call, expecting to either see a bluff or a chop versus another ace, but no. They show 5-8 of diamonds for a rivered, worse full house. Not a hand I was expecting to see from a player calling a raise pre-flop, I guess I'll be looking to get involved in more pots with them. Here I pick up ace queen offsuit on the button. There's a limp from under the gun and I raise to 1500, which has to be a misclick because we're still at the 200 big blind level. Not really sure what happened here, but as it is, the under the gun player makes the call. We go heads up to a flop of queen king for rainbow and my opponent checks. This is a great flop for my range and a decent one for my hand, but it looks like I check back here, perhaps for pot control. The turn brings the 9 of clubs and under the gun snap checks to me for a second time. With straight and flush draws opening up on this turn, I decide to bet 1500 and the under the gun player folds. We're now at the 400 big blind level and I get an upgrade to ace king offsuit in the small blind. Action folds around to the button who makes it 1000 to go. I 3-bet to 3500 and both the big blind and button make the fold. In this hand I get dealt queen 3 of diamonds in the small blind at the 600 big blind level. There's a limp from the cutoff, the button calls. Based on what I've seen from the big blind, I don't expect them to squeeze very often, so I complete, and as expected, the big blind checks their option. We go 4 ways to a flop of jack, ace, 4, all diamonds. Boom! I flop the flush. While I could potentially get in trouble if another diamond comes, I decide to check for deception and action checks around. The turn is the 10 of spades. I think this card opens up some 2-pair possibilities, so I bet 2000 and my only customer is the cutoff. Heads up to the river, which brings the deuce of spades. I'm going to try and get some more value from my flush. I bet 5000 and the cutoff folds. It's been pretty smooth sailing through those 5 first levels. I managed to run my stack from 30k up to a little above 40k, but then an entire hour goes by during which I'm either completely card dead, or I open and whiff the flop, or call a raise and miss. And in a tournament with 20-minute levels, that unfortunately means my stack has dwindled down to around 4 big blinds. I'm just sitting around waiting for a spot to go all in and either chip up or double up. And I finally get my chance at the 1500 big blind level when I look down at pocket sixes and the under the gun player open jams has me covered. I'm hoping they got overcards as I make the call. I didn't expect it, but the button also goes all in, so it's not looking great for me. It looks even worse when under the gun player flips over pocket aces and the button shows pocket sevens. We're going 3 ways to a run out. Let's see if we can find a miracle. The flop is actually not bad for my hand as it comes deuce 5-3 with 2 diamonds, giving me a gut shot. I can now win this hand with a 6 or a 4. The turn is the jack of hearts. Come on, dealer, a 6 or a 4, one time. The turn is the 10 of diamonds. I was off to a good start, but unfortunately could not keep the momentum going. GG.
But wait! There's more!
I immediately make my way to the cage and register for the 9 p.m. $200 Daily Deepstack, in which I was fortunate to make a pretty deep run. You can catch all the action from that tournament in the previous vlog, which is linked in the description box, along with my other vlogs from this trip. Let's fast forward to the next day. I have a 3 p.m. flight back to Portland and I want to squeeze one more poker session before heading home, so I make my way to the Bellagio, and this 1-2 scrub puts his name on the list for 2-5, and while I wait, I make my way to Palio where I get some coffee and one of the best tiramisus I've ever had. As I'm eating, I'm daydreaming of winning a $2,000 pot against some table maniac like so many of my favorite vloggers, but things turned out a little bit different. Any nerves I had of playing 2-5 for the very first time quickly vanished as I find myself at one of the nittiest cash game tables I've ever sat at. Let's jump in. In the first hand of note, I look down at ace queen offsuit from under the gun. I open up the action to $20 and I get calls from the cutoff and the big blind players. We go 3 ways to a flop of 8-3 jack with 2 diamonds. Not the best flop for my hand. I check and both players check as well. When the turn brings another 3, I decide to take a stab for $35, and that is good enough to make the 2 other players fold. I take down the pot. Here, we join the action as the button opens to $10 and I call from the big blind with queen jack offsuit. We go heads up to a flop of 5-5-5 rainbow. I check to the razor and they check back. The turn is another 5, and once again, action checks around. The river is another 5. No, I'm kidding. It's a good one though. It's the queen of spades, so I make a boat. I bet $15 trying to make it look like a bluff, like I'm ever bluffing here, and the button folds. In this one, I pick up ace-10 offsuit in the hijack. Action folds to me, I open to $20. At least I think I'm raising to $20, but I'm actually calling the raise to 15 from the under the gun player that I didn't see. Whoops. The button and big blind come along. We go 4 ways to a flop of king, 5, deuce, all hearts. Big blind and under the gun check, and I'm not too sure what to do here. I could definitely bet, but I decide to check for 2 reasons. The first is that I don't want to face a raise from a player behind me and get blown off my equity. The second is I think most people would expect the ace of hearts to bet out here. So even though I only have ace high, I feel like I'm checking for deception and I can win more money if another heart was to come. So I check and the button checks. We go to the turn, which is not a heart, but a jack, giving me a gut shot straight draw on top of the nut flush draw. When action checks to me for a second time, I bet out $45 and everybody folds. As I mentioned before, this was a pretty nitty table and I did not really pick up any good cards over this short session, so this is the last hand for the vlog. I get dealt ace-jack offsuit on the button. The hijack opens to $15. I decide to just call here in position and the big blind comes along. We go 3 ways to a flop of queen-jack-3 with 2 hearts and action checks around. The turn brings another queen, and once again, action checks to me. I think I make a mistake here. It's unlikely that one of my opponents has a queen, now that there's 2 on the board, so my pair of jacks is probably good. There's 2 flush draws, so there's definitely some value to be had, but I decide to check back for pot control. The river brings the 9 of spades, so none of the flush draws get there, and when action checks to the hijack, they decide to bet $45. Something about this bet feels suspicious to me. I think if they had anything on the flop or turn, they would have bet to protect and get value from the flush draws. Looking at this player, they don't seem like the type of player to bluff, but I don't know, something just feels off. After thinking for about 40 seconds, I decide to look them up. The big blind gets out of the way, and the hijack shows pocket 9s for the rivered full house. This concludes my trip to the 2022 World Series of Poker. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to smash that like button if you did. If you want to check out the other vlogs from this trip, you can find them in the description box below. If you want to see my next video, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching, good luck at the tables, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!